Hi, I'm Tim Weatherford, lead instructor for Tulsa Welding School. So today we're going to talk about TIG welding, kind of the basic parts, things you're going to need, things to think about if you're if you're wanting to get into it, if you're wanting to do it for just home use, if you're going to do some big projects with it, kind of sizing appropriate for it. So I guess what we'll do is we'll kind of talk about the machine. Okay, so when it comes to TIG welding, you don't have to have a machine that is just, only thing it does is TIG welding, okay? Really any machine that'll do DC stick welding can also be used for TIG welding. So that's all this one is. The only thing we have to be able to do is change the polarity. So the polarity is your electron flow. And what we have to do different, so when we run stick welding, we're going to run DC positive. So we're going to make sure that our lead that has our stinger hooked up to it is going to the positive side of the machine, and our ground clamp is going to be going to the negative side of the machine for stick welding. Now for TIG welding, we want to switch that. We want to make sure that we're running our stinger side to the negative side of our machine, and we want our ground clamp side going to the positive side, okay? And what we're going to do is go ahead and kind of show you the basic parts of a TIG setup, things you're going to have, things you may not have to have, you may think about later on. But for right now, let's kind of go through the basic parts of it. So we have our TIG rig, is what it's most commonly going to be referred to as. You've got a combination hose, which has got a power cable that runs through the center of it. Your inert gas also flows through the line. It does a couple things. It helps keep the copper braid in it cool when it has the gas flow off over it. It's a lot easier to deal with than having a bunch of cables and hoses. Some of them have multiple lines coming out of it. But anyway, for what we're doing, general purpose, this type of setup, perfectly fine. You can actually use it in industrial applications also. So these are actually two different parts. You have your TIG hose. It's got a threaded connection that goes into your TIG body, which is just this part here. This one's equipped with a argon shutoff valve. This is not meant to control the flow of the gas, it's just meant to be an on-off. So whenever you get the setup, and you're, getting ready to weld, you want to make sure, remember, this valve is just for on-off. We'll talk more about it in a little bit. So as far as other parts to the TIG torch that you're going to need, one thing you're going to have to decide what type of cups you're going to use. And one of the types that, or one of the setups that you can use is a gas lens setup, where it has a bunch of diffusers in it. It's going to wind up making more of a cloud than it is just jets coming out. So it kind of helps shield our weld a lot better. And then whenever we decide if we're going to use the standard or if we're going to use a gas lens setup, we need to decide on cups, okay? So they come in a variety of sizes, anywhere from a 4 all the way up to an 8. It really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing some kind of groove welding where you're walking the cup, you can size it appropriately to set in that groove. If you're freehanding, like for a high frequency setup, or you might not be able to walk the cup, you may want to go with a little bit larger cup. That way it gets kind of a larger gas plume over your weld. So we make sure we got good shielding over it. So once we've decided on all that, a couple other basic parts that we're going to make sure we're going to use. For one, this little insulator, okay? And we'll talk more about it, some of the, the reasons why we're going to use that. And another thing we're going to make sure we have is a collet. This is what actually holds the tungsten in place. We'll talk a little bit more about it, and it's when we're doing the assembly. And something else, we want to make sure that we're using tungsten, or we're going to have to use tungsten. We're going to need it. It comes in a variety of sizes, you know, from 1/16 of an inch all the way up to, you know, a 5/32, which is very large. For most general use, you're probably going to be in anywhere from a 3/32 range all the way up to a 1/8. The 16ths, you know, if you're doing some lightweight stuff, maybe some crafty stuff or something, you could probably go that small with it. But for, you know, general use, 3/32 and up to an 1/8. And there's also different varieties or different kinds of tungsten. We have this one's a 2% seriated tungsten. There's also a 2% thoriated. There's lanthanated, zirconiated, a few different kinds. And we'll talk more about the tungsten in a little bit. So as far as assembling all this stuff to get it to where, you know, we can actually use it, we need to, for one, we're going to have a gas bottle. 100% argon. We can't use any kind of mixed gases with it. Has to be 100% argon. And attaching to that, we're going to have some way of regulating gas. So we can use either a regulator or we can use a flow meter, which it just has a little tube with a ball that floats in there and kind of tells you what the flow is. But either way, you can use a regulator, flow meter, whichever one that you either have or you have access to. As far as after that, you're going to need an inert gas hose that's going to attach to your power block. So you're going to have an inert gas hose coming into here, and then your TIG hose is going to screw into this side. This is where it picks up its power from. So once we've got our machine set up, you know, on the negative side, we can take something like our stinger, clamp onto it, or you can rig up some other kind of setup to where you tie your power into this, whether you put a lug on the end of your lead or whatever you need to do, and bolt it on. Just remember that this is electrically hot once it's connected to the machine. So if it winds up hitting something metal that's grounded out, you're going to it's going to arc on you. So shield it some way. I've seen a lot of people take a collar off of a leather glove, put over it, anything to shield it, a rubber boot, whatever you need to do that. So we've gotten this far. We've got it coming from the machine to our power block. Now we can come over to our torch. So I always recommend whenever you're assembling these torches, some of the kits that's already in boxes or whatever, they come with the tail already put into place. I recommend taking it off, okay? So put it to the side. We are going to need it, but a few of the parts that we should put on first to make sure everything's tightened down properly. We're not going to have any issues with the tungsten slipping, whatever. This will kind of help eliminate that problem. All right, so we've got our gas lens. We've got to thread it in. We just took the protector off of it. Now we have our insulator. You can kind of see one end is flattened off, it's a little bit larger. The other end is belled with a little bit of a taper to it. We want to make sure that tapered end of it goes toward the TIG torch. So we want the bigger end going to the gas lens, smaller end going to the TIG torch. So we're going to put the torch, or put it up to the torch, thread it in, make sure you align it properly, because we've got to think that this is copper and brass, both soft materials. If we cross thread it, we're going to wind up messing it up, and we could be out where we'll have to go buy a new one just because we've threaded it on wrong. So make sure we check it out. The other thing we're going to do is tighten it, finger tight, hand tight. Don't take a pair of pliers to it. Remember, soft material or soft metal, so it's going to wind up taking the threads, ripping them out, or it'll get bound up to where you're not going to get it back apart easily. So we've got our gas lens on. We can pick our whatever size cup that we're going to need for whatever type of project that we're doing. We're going to take and thread it on. Remember, finger tight, it's all. Okay, so we got all that on there. And we're going to take our collet. The collets come in a few different styles. They have some that are wedge type, to where it's kind of comes in at an angle. Or there's this type that's tapered and has a little cut right down the middle of it, and the other end is belled. So that the end that has the small taper to it and the split goes toward the front of the TIG torch, or toward the gas lens. We're just going to drop it in like so, and now we can put our tail on. And the reason we want to do that is because a lot of times when people are assembling them, the tail is just a little bit tight and the gas lens doesn't thread in all the way, and you assemble everything and it seems like everything is tight except for the tungsten keeps wanting to fall out. That's why I assemble it just like I just showed you, step by step, and you're not going to have that kind of issue. So once we've got all that assembled, we can take our piece of tungsten, like I said, 3/32, and we slide it into the opening. Some people put them in from the back side. I don't really like doing that. I mean, you can, but slide it in from the front side, dug it down, and it holds, just like so. So as far as preparation, when we're, other steps to take whenever we're getting ready to do when we're getting ready to TIG weld, we're going to have to prep our tungsten. All right, so there's a few different options for sharpening tungsten. They make some attachments that go on the end of Dremel tools that have different angles set. Some people choose to use a bench grinder. Just make sure, whichever option that you use, it's safe option. We don't want to, somebody to be, constantly doing something unsafe. Also, when we're using a bench grinder, we want to make sure we use the side of the stone. There's a lot of people that want to use the face of the stone. A few things that happen with that. For one, you hollow grind your tungsten, so you wind up with a real thin tapered tip to it, and it breaks off really easily. The other thing is those trails that get cut into the face of that stone, sometimes they wind up chipping off after a little bit of time, and before you know it, you're sharpening your tungsten and it hits one of those little notches, and there's some safety issues. I've seen people with punctures to the hand, wind up catching a piece to the stomach, whatever. So be safe with it. Always use the side of the stone. That way it's a good flat surface, or a good flat point to your tungsten. And now, as far as how long do you make the point? So depending on what you're doing, if you're doing something, like aluminum or whatever, where the tip or the point doesn't matter as much, you can have a shorter point. As far as welding something like carbon steel, stainless steel, a good rule of thumb, if you'll take a couple other pieces of tungsten, to kind of gauge. So a good rule of thumb, you can take 3 of the same size pieces of tungsten. That's how long your point should be, from point to shoulder. They say anywhere from 2 to 3 times your rod diameter whenever you're dealing with a tungsten. So kind of all just good rules of thumb to get you started. Once you get your hand into it and you get more proficient with it, you'll kind of make a few little tweaks and changes here and there to kind of more fit you. So everything is more, once you get to doing it a lot more, it's more personal preference. So that's more or less the basic setup of a TIG torch.